For we contend not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities, against the powers, against the world rulers of this present darkness, against the spiritual host of wickedness in the heavenly places. From the American Midwest comes This Present Darkness, where we explore the supernatural aspects of the paranormal from a Catholic perspective and expose the dark forces in our world and beyond, both seen and unseen. Now, here's your host, historian, paranormal investigator, author, and ghost lorist, Ursula Bielski.
Well, welcome everyone. I am so delighted that you're here with me tonight. My name's Ursula Bielski. For those of you who don't know me, I am a 35-year paranormal investigator, historian, and lifelong Catholic. And on this show, we look at everything in the world of the supernatural from a Catholic perspective. And tonight, I'm so excited to have with me a very special guest and author. He went through such an incredible, terrifying story that he finally decided to come forward with during the COVID pandemic. We're going to find out about how that happened. And it's not your standard demonic possession story, because this man actually did not get help. He lived through 12 years of not his own possession, but that of his mother. It's an incredible story, and it's also a very strangely inspiring story, as well as terrifying. I'm so happy to have with us here tonight Michael Anthony Gagliari, and he's the author of the best-selling book, Take the Hindmost. So I'm so happy to have you here with me tonight, Michael.
Well, thank you. I appreciate giving me the opportunity to tell my story. It's taken a long time to be able to come forward and talk about this. I've suppressed it for good 40 plus years, and it's finally time to talk about it and tell people that these things are real. These things are real. 12 years is I always, when I do interviews, I tell people, this isn't an incident. Most people have an incident that was, 5 minutes, 20 minutes, something like this. This was 12 long years, and it was kind of, suppressed and by the authorities, by the local police, by the local mental institution. And it really kept me in bondage for a long time. And it was hard to process it. When you're a child, children are very resilient. They suppress things. They are the real survivors. Children go through a lot, and it's not till they become adults that that suppression comes out. Because we're like anything. We have to deal. If you don't deal with something, it becomes like a cancer in your life, and that's kind of 40 years of suppressing that is where I've come to today. So
as I mentioned, I read or I watched you in an interview talking about how it was during the pandemic. You might have written about that in the book too. Can't remember.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, it was during the pandemic that you decided to tell the story. And that really hit home with me because, as a lot of the viewers know, I've been a paranormal investigator for 35 years. I've worked with thousands of families and other people with issues like this. And I am a Catholic, so a lot of the times it did involve things that went into the demonic or the spiritual preternatural realm. And I went into a lot of occult activity as that became like the theme of like ghost hunting. After like around 2000, people started using all kinds of tools and devices to communicate with spirits. And that was not how I was taught to do paranormal investigation, but I was caught up in all of that. And it was during the pandemic that I really I had the time, to take a good hard look at what I was doing. And my mother had just passed away also. And I went into a deep depression at that time, which I think really brought me to the brink of something very dark. And we're going to talk about how your mother had a loss that seemed to be the root, maybe the root of what happened to her. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. But can you talk to us a little bit about how you did decide to finally come forward with this, and how your family reacted to it when you told them you're going to tell this story very publicly in a book?
Well, thank you for asking that question, because that is uh, the real pinnacle of it all, is coming out and saying anything. You know, of course, the pandemic afforded all of us lots of time. We had time on our hands. And when I decided to write the book, it wasn't for the public. It was just for my daughters. I have 2 daughters and 6 grandchildren. And, my kids know some stuff. And, they've got little children. They both have 3 kids apiece. So they don't have time to sit down and say, okay, let me tell you what happened to dad, when he was a kid. We just don't have that time. We're not afforded that luxury right now. So I said, you know what? I've got time. I'm going to write. This is my legacy. I'm going to write what happened to dad, which can kind of connect the dots with my daughters and my grandkids. And because obviously going through something like that, you don't come out on the other end, all fine, like, oh my gosh, what a hidden story you had. It just doesn't work like that.
Right.
There's a lot of shrapnel, that goes around in the family. And so this connected the dots for a lot of them. So I wrote it for them. And when I was in the process of writing it, I think it took me, I don't know, 5 months to write it. Incidentally, when I wrote it, half the book got edited out when I was finally finished it, because I went on about so much, and there was so much more I just didn't even add, because I didn't think it was, it was kind of too gory or gruesome, or so I didn't even put all the stuff in there. But anyway, as I was going along, my girls would ask me, so how's it going on the book? And I said, it's going good. I said, it's kind of therapeutic to, run through the motions of that. And it was also very, very, very dark and deep and heavy to write that stuff, because, I totally, as much as I could, I put it aside, and try to survive. I'm like the ultimate faker. I've faked 40 years of living. Everybody thinks I got it all together, and that's far from the reality of it. But as I was going on, my girls started asking me questions like, Dad, you should really consider, putting it out there, in case. One of my daughters said, you always said that you wish somebody would have rescued you. Somebody would have had the guts to come in and go, what is going on in your life? What is going on at your house? And my daughter said that, you might be helping somebody else with
Right.
this. And that hit me kind of like a sledgehammer, because it was, I wanted to be rescued. I wanted to be rescued, but I couldn't verbalize that to anyone, because, growing up like I did, you really didn't think anything was wrong. It was like, this is how your family was. This is how your life was. You're a kid. What do you know? Nobody's intruding in your family, so it must not be that bad.
And it was a very
Like,
different time. You and I grew up, I
yes,
think we're almost the same age, if not the same age. And we grew up during the 1970s, 80s. It wasn't
yes,
like everybody was in your business. Your parents raised you, they did what they wanted with you, and that was
right.
it. Yeah.
Everything was hush hush back then.
Mhm.
So once I finished the book, I had a couple of months to kind of mull around the idea. I talked to my girls a few more times, and I said, you know what, I think you're right. I might go public. But at that point, I didn't have the guts to, because I was afraid of the retribution. I was afraid of people going, you're doing this to sell books and stuff like this. And, that was never the intent. And then I was watching, you know, I was doing some research, and I had watched a movie, not a movie, a documentary. I don't like movies, because they're, movies on the demonic are all, they're all fantasized bunch of, Hollywood junk. Some of it's true, most of it isn't. Um, I watched a documentary called Hostage to the Devil,
Right.
and it was about a producer named Marty Stalker. And I was just listening to the producer. The documentary was interesting, but I was listening to the producer and his compassion for the subject. And I thought, well, here's a guy who he knows what he's gotten into. And he's not necessarily a believer, a spiritual believer, or, a believer in God or anything. But he said, there's something here. There's something to this. And he had a compassion about him. I don't know if it was his Irish accent or whatever, but there was a compassion that kind of drew me to him. So I said, whatever. I said, I'm gonna contact this guy. I'm gonna contact this guy and just see if he'd be interested in reading the book and getting his input on it, since I knew he did the research. He did the research in Malachi Martin's cases, and interviewed Malachi Martin and some other people.
And we've talked about Malcolm Martin on this show in the past also.
Right. So he's done a lot. He's done his legwork,
Right.
And I thought he sounds pretty compassionate. I felt comfortable enough to approach him. So I ended up sending him an email. I think it was on a Thursday night or a Friday night, and I said, listen, Martin, I got this story, I'm just coming out with it. And would you be interested in just taking a look at it and giving me, some sort of, feedback, from my side, it was just, my God, just please believe me. That's basically what I wanted him. The response I wanted him was just, please believe me, because the last thing you need to do is put yourself out there and be rejected and harassed and harangued by people. It's like, my God, I'm just trying to tell my story here. I was an eyewitness to this. I don't have to fabricate anything. I don't have to magnify anything. This is my story. I lived through it. It was day to day for me. It wasn't an incident. So I wrote him an email, and he said, yeah, send me the manuscript. Send me the manuscript. I'm not sure if it was edited at that point or not. I had a friend who was an editor do the editing for me, so I was comfortable with her, and the subject matter. She was, she is a believer, and so that was fine. I felt comfortable with that. So I sent it to him, and then I think I heard back to him on Monday morning, Irish time, whatever that is. And he said, Michael, listen, he said, this is one of the craziest stories I've ever heard in my life. And I've researched this stuff. So I said, I wrote him back, and we started communicating with each other. And he was so compassionate about me, and not just the story, but, concerned about my welfare. And he says, this story's got to be told. And he's a producer. He said, he told me, he says, we got to make a movie. We got to do something with this, because this is something that has to get out there, because it's not just an incident. Well, this happened to me on June the 7th,
Right.
18, this was 12 years of this kind of stuff. And that's really what he told me. He even told me how to get it published.
That's
and
great.
that was the beginning of going public. And I remember the day that I got it published, and I uploaded it on Amazon, and I was like, okay, like, here we go. And to answer your second question, my family, my father still to this day does not know that I released the book, and I want to kind of keep it like that, because he's old. We've never talked about this. And I mentioned my father in the book and some of the experiences that we had together. I never mention him. He's an old man. I don't want to put that kind of,
Right.
harassment
Sure.
on him.
Sure.
So he doesn't even know about it to this day. But my family members kind of got wind of it. And, most rejected me. But there was one in particular, one of my cousins, who kind of put the dots all together and kind of said, well, that's what happened to you. That's why you guys disappeared. That's why we never visited. We never, and kind of put all the dots together.
Yeah.
And a few other siblings of his and family members kind of went, oh, okay, now we understand. But he's the only one that I really talked to. And, said, here, this is what happened, man. And he's like, dude, I totally believe you. This makes sense. This
Right.
makes sense, because all those years we never did family things, or even if we did see each other, it was never at my house. It was, somewhere 110 miles away, and we were isolated and secluded.
Go back to when you were very young, before things started to happen with your mom. Where did you live? What was, was your family situation like? You painted such a beautiful picture of, the things that you did with you spent a lot of time with your dad. You had seems like a healthy, typical ethnic immigrant kind of background family. Well, and so, yeah, just paint a little picture for us going up to what started to happen with your mom.
Well, for me, it started in the early 70s. I was probably 3 years old. And for as early as I can remember, something wasn't quite right with my mother. She wasn't a nurturer. Like, she never held me, she never kissed me, she never, coddled me, anything like that. And the very first incident, which really, I think, began I was traumatized by it for sure, was that, as an Italian family, the children always eat this food, called pasta fagioli, which is like,
Sure, yeah.
to most kids, like star soup or alphabet
My
soup.
husband's Italian.
Yeah, it was a daub of ricotta in it, that
Mhm.
kind of thing. And I would always get that for lunch, and it would always be on the table. And then my mother would call me, to the table, and then I'd eat my soup. But this one time I went and I sat at the table. My mother came up behind me. I was just sitting there, and she dumped the soup from the pot all down my shoulder. And it was scalding. I was screaming. And, I can't remember her saying two words to me. I remember her getting on the phone and calling a taxi, and we went to the doctor. I remember sitting in the taxi, and whimpering, and a burn hurts, and she never said a word to me, never touched me. We went to the doctor. I don't remember the doctor visit, other than I remember sitting in the waiting room, you know, and we went home. And that was the beginning where I started to look at my mother, like, not look at my mother like in a motherly way, but look at her like, kind of like an in-house enemy. And that it triggered something in me where I became extremely analytical for the rest of my life. And I began to just watch her because I was afraid. I was afraid of her, and that traumatized me. And from that point on, from that point on, I began to just watch her, and she began to talk to herself. And we moved from that was an apartment where it happened, and then we moved into a house.
And this was in
And then we
Canada where you
This is
grew
in
up.
Canada. Yeah, I
Mhm.
was born in Etobicoke, and we lived around the Mississauga area in the early 70s. We moved several times. I have no idea why, but I remember from that apartment we moved into a house. I have a sister who's 7 years older than me, so she kind of filled in some of the gaps for me. But she remembers quite well too, that because she was, quite a bit older than me, that when we were in the house, I was still little, pre-kindergarten. And my mother saying she's hearing noises in the house, knocking, scratching.
And at first,
Um,
you weren't hearing these things either at first.
no, I wasn't hearing anything. I didn't know what to hear. I probably would have just attributed as, house noises, or someone in the house, a logical explanation.
Right.
But I do remember being terrified at night. Being terrified at night. And in that same house, this was the same house where my mother said she was hearing voices, knocking, scratching. Um, she she said that she was seeing little people run around the house. And I was just a kid. I really didn't take that for much of anything. But I remember in the same house going to bed and having just this awful presence of just being terrified. And I remember my door being open and hearing my mother and her sister talking about seances and stuff like this. And I never knew what the word was, but I kept it up here. And it wasn't until years later that I put that together, what a seance was. My mother's sister was very into a cult. She was into a cult, and so was her daughter,
Okay.
and which she was a few years older than me, her daughter. But this is kind of where we, put the puzzle pieces together. That recently, before this, a few years before this, her father, my grandfather, had died in a train accident. I guess he was drunk, went across, was stumbled across the railroad tracks and got run over by a train, cut his legs off, killed him. Back in those days, the train ran through your backyard. There were no,
Right.
there were no stop things. Everybody had common sense back then, and that's kind of what happened. But my mother, so I'm told, adored her father. I mean, just adored her father. And when he died, she was crushed. She was the eldest. She took care of the younger children when my grandma, I guess, went out and partied to suppress some of the pain. But we believe that my mother and her sister opened the doorway by having a seance and trying to talk to her father because she missed him so terribly bad. She loved him so bad. And it was in around all that same time in the early, back in the early 70s, seances and stuff. People were doing that at
Everybody
parties.
did. Yeah. All that
Yeah,
exploration and all the new age
right.
started.
And,
Yeah.
as we're very educated today, we know that those are entryways for demonic entities. You're giving permission.
I
for
only
them to
found out a
enter your
couple
life.
years ago too that just the loss is a doorway. Without even doing the seances and stuff, just experiencing a loss like that where you lose so much of yourself.
Yeah, I
Even
mean, if you
that
don't
can be a
understand the
doorway.
afterlife,
Yeah.
if you don't understand the afterlife, then
Right.
there's a willingness to want to communicate. And we're told in the Bible that necromancy, is wrong, it's evil, and God forbade it, and it was punishable by death. Why? Because it was possible.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Right.
God made it a law.
Right.
Even King Saul broke it, but he made it a law because it works. It's possible. God made that available to test his people. So I think that was the entryway. And my sister kind of agrees with me. She says, yeah, that's what was going on at the time. And ever since then, that's when my mother changed. And as the years went on, things got worse and worse. I don't understand what was going on in the family dynamics because we ended up moving 110 miles away. And my dad still worked, like we were living in the Toronto area. It's kind of like New York. You got suburbs, you got burbs,
Right.
boroughs. We have the same thing in Toronto. We have boroughs. Mississauga is a borough, and for some reason, we moved 110 miles away to a little town. And then my dad still worked in Toronto. So he'd have to drive all the way in, stay there 5-6 days a week, and then come home maybe on a weekend for a day or two and then leave. So that was kind of weird. But, I was 5 years old. I didn't care. And then once we became isolated like that, we were completely isolated in this little town of 4,000. That's where things started to escalate. And my mother not only started hearing voices, but started to act out. And this grew and grew and grew. She started going over to the neighbor's house, knocking on their door and saying that she didn't accept them and she was going to cut their heads off. That was all the neighbors got that treatment. So here the police started coming now. What's going on? The police were always over at our house. In fact, I now have my records from social services of all of the police accounts and all the notes that the police wrote. I have all those notes now.
Because your mom was very abusive and it was escalating.
It was getting from the time I was 6 or 7 or 8, somewhere in there, that's when she started knocking on doors saying she's going to cut people's heads off. She started threatening people. She was becoming extremely obese, eating like an animal, eating everything in the house to the point where we were starving. My dad would be gone for 6 days. She'd eat everything. And I spent my entire childhood life stealing food out of gardens, during the summertime, and stealing lunches out of the kids, out of the coat room, during winter. I was, stealing food from kids, and inviting myself over to friends' houses, which now that'll make sense to if any of my friends, hear stuff like this, they'll know,
It was so interesting because, we always think of addiction being being associated with demonic possession, but we always think of drugs, alcohol, pornography. You don't think about food, but that was
Yeah.
central to this. Your mom's
Yes.
addiction to food was central, and you came to believe that the demons they were intent on killing her with this addiction.
Yes, was the plan all along, because if you've ever known the story of Anneliese Michel, or
Yes.
Anneliese Michel, the girl in Germany, and I bring that up frequently. She was starved to death by the entities that were in her, and my mother was the exact opposite. She ate like a ravenous animal. There was nothing feminine about her. And by the time I was 16, this is when it escalated to such heights. It was horrifying and graphically disturbing. She was 5 feet tall and probably weighed, I don't know, my guesstimate as a kid was, between 200 and 250 pounds. She was grossly, morbidly obese. All of her teeth were all cracked and broken. Every one of her teeth were cracked and broken. Her molars were like half pieces.
And I should just interject. You have pictures of her, and she is just this adorable little Italian lady, right?
Yes, from the
when
50s.
she married your
Yeah.
father, just a beautiful, adorable little thing.
Yeah,
Feminine.
the change was horrifying. She, like I said, she was morbidly obese. All of her teeth were broken, and because of that, she would chew on her tongue, and her tongue, she'd wag her tongue at me like that. Both sides of her tongue would always be like just mangled. It was like a serrated bread knife. It was just horrifying. It was just horrifying. And by that time, she wasn't just talking to herself. She was talking to herself all day long, out loud, screaming, having conversations in multiple voices,
multiple voices and languages.
multiple language. It drove me insane. And there were times where I would walk right up to her nose to nose and scream in her face to stop it. And I wouldn't even face her. There was a couple of lucid moments in around when I was between 16, 17 years old, where I'd hear her normal speaking voice, and she'd come out and say to me, it was like a plea almost. She had like 30 seconds window, and she would say to me, they're coming into me. They're running up the back of my spine and perching in my head and coming into my head. And then snap her and go into all of these, manic voices talking to each other. And it just got to the point where I was like losing my mind. I mean, I was trying to spend as much time staying overnight at other friends' houses. Some nights where I had to spend at home, I would sleep in the park. There was a park called Beautiful Joe Park, and I would sleep on the picnic table just because I felt solace there. If you ever read the book of Beautiful Joe, it's about this dog that's horribly abused. And that happened in my little town. That's where that book was written.
Wow.
Yeah, the dog was horribly abused, and this lady took this horribly abused dog, and the owner cut its ears off, stabbed him, kicked him, did all this stuff. And I felt like that dog. And that's why I gravitated to this park, and I slept on the picnic table there. I spent a lot of time there. And it just got so bad, and it culminated in one afternoon.
And I'm sorry, excuse me, your mom was
No, go ahead.
hurting herself too, physically.
In the last years, she was spending her time sitting in a chair that bottomed out because of her weight. She was wretchedly, she smelled wretchedly, and she was hitting herself with a log in the chest until she would be bloody in her chest. And she would do that. I mean, I would disappear, one day she'd be hitting herself with a log and, and screaming. And then I'd take off, come back 2 days later, and I would be coming in the driveway and the windows were open, and I could hear the thuds from her hitting herself with the log in the chest. And she had not stopped, and I'd go into the house, and there she was. She wouldn't even pay attention to me. I would like come and go as if I was like vapor. She never really acknowledged me, except for 2 times when she said, they come into me through my spine, and they come into my head. That's how they enter, and that was just 2 lucid moments in the last 4 years of her life that I heard her voice, in her normal speaking voice.
Yeah, there was no mom.
No. She was completely taken over. And the nights, as soon as dusk, as soon as the sun went down, she would go into her room. She retreated into her room. And then a whole night of different things would start happening. You'd hear banging, and we lived in a house with a subfloor. We had a basement.
Mhm.
We had a subfloor. And when you have a subfloor, if you hit your foot, stomp your foot, you can hear it throughout the whole house because it's a subfloor. And I would hear all this banging going on in her room. Like 3 people were wrestling. I'd hear against walls and floor, and it was undetermined where the noises were coming from. They were coming from her room. And then I would run into her room and open the door. And mind you, she was morbidly obese and she didn't move very fast, but I would, jet in there, open the door really quick, like, what the hell's going on? And she'd be lying in her bed with the covers pulled up to her eyes, right to her eyes. And she wouldn't say a thing. And sometimes she would say, Satan is jumping on my chest from the ceiling. And then she'd be screaming. And I would run into the room and she'd just be lying there. And I'm like, where the hell is all this noise coming from? All this banging and, because it was clearly in the house. The house wasn't very big, and her room was the first room in the left on the hallway from the living room. So, I'm a mere 5-6 steps and I'm there. And I'm hearing all this noise, and I just started to avoid it. And then she'd be screaming bloody murder, and she'd try to get in my room every night. And for many, many years, I weighted down my armoire with bricks. I took my clothes out and I loaded it all down with bricks. And then at nighttime, I push it against my door. And then when I'd sleep in my bed, I slept with a hockey stick in the fetal position. And I slept like that for so many years, not moving, that I wore holes from the pressure points from my ankle, my knee, my hip, my shoulder, to where the spring started poking through, and I never moved until morning. And, most nights she would come and rattle the door, 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, rattle the door and try to get in. And then I'd her go stomping down the hallway.
God, how absolutely horrifying.
And I would wake up and go to school the next day,
Right.
like nothing happened.
Back then, as you already mentioned, there was nobody believed in demonic possession in
No,
the
no.
1970s. And, we think immediately, oh my gosh, this woman needed an exorcist. But what did your father think was wrong with your mom? Did he tell you, like, oh, this is wrong with mom? Or did you even talk about it? Or
my dad, because he worked in Toronto, he slept in his truck. So he stayed down there 5-6 days a week. When he did come up on the weekend, he was either working or fishing. So I never saw him. We never talked. And, when my mother was acting out, when he was there, sitting in her chair doing that, he just thought she was crazy. I mean, that's the guise of it all, is that, demonic entities, they hide in people.
Right.
The word demon, in the Greek means disembodied spirit. To be disembodied spirit means that you had to have a body before. So that's what they want. They want to hide in a body. I mean, Jesus said when he came to the demoniac at Gennesaret, they said, Son of Man, why are you here to torment us before our time? Let us go into the pigs. So they wanted habitation, because it says, when a spirit leaves a man, it goes and it wanders, and then it says, hey, I'm going to return to the host, because they like it there. And this is one of the things about mental disorder and all this stuff, is they love to hide behind diseases. Someone might have mental disorder, but that's where they like to hide, because they got a scapegoat.
And in those days too, you said your father said she's crazy. If you were crazy back then, you were just crazy. There was nothing.
You were just
about
crazy.
it.
Yeah.
There was nothing. Nobody wanted to. No one was going to try to help you or take you to a psychiatrist or
That's
therapy.
right. And the funny thing is this stuff for me has never stopped. It's never stopped. I'll be on the street and somebody from across the street will be yelling at me in another language. A lady sounding like a man.
So they
yelling at me.
know who you are.
Correct. You're the first one that's been able to identify that when I've said that. They know who I am. It happened a couple of weeks ago.
I wonder, I've been thinking about your story the last couple of days, and I wonder if you've ever thought this. Do you think you were the target?
You just hit it on the nose. Out of all of these years, I remember now looking back everything, and I've told this in a number of interviews, that I've said that I now know that I was the target. And the reason why is because God tells demonic entities, he tells Satan the plans. He's told Satan the plans. He says, this is what I'm going to do. God announces the plans to his prophets. Even in Genesis 3:15, God announces to Satan, I'm going to put enmity between your seed and the woman's seed. Basically, God's declaring war.
Right.
He always tells the plans, and I believe he told, that's why I was targeted. It was my mother was just the vessel. She was the willing participant in this to drive me crazy. Incidentally
Well, I
enough,
noticed that you said 2 family members of yours committed suicide, and that when you
yes,
would go down in the basement, because it was both in the basements, their basements, and you said you would get that feeling, that impulse
yes,
too. And I was like, I wondered
yes,
that if that was the intention of these demons to drive you to
yes,
suicide.
yes. Demonic entities, they love suicide, because
Yes.
suicide is your own rejection of God. It's
Yes.
like, I don't believe in you enough, and the whole Judas thing kind of cements that and shows that that's the ultimate slap in God's face, is to take your own life, because we're made in his image. And sadly enough, my cousin, who was my mother's sister, who was a cultish involved, she ended up hanging herself. She had 3 kids and she hanged herself in the basement. Does a woman hang herself? What a
Never.
horrible way to go, and what a sight for whoever
God.
finds you in your own house.
Oh my God.
And so that's demonic by nature. It's demonic by nature. But I've always believed that I was the target, if you will, because I'm the only one on my whole side of the family that has come to salvation in Jesus Christ. I'm the only one. In fact, when I came to California, that's where I fled to when I became a teenager. I fled to California. When I met my wife, I was the first one in her family to really come to Jesus Christ. And after I did, bing, everybody in the family started coming. It just started spreading.
Oh
So
my
there was a
God.
plan. There was a plan for me to come
Oh,
3,000 miles
praise
away.
God.
That my childhood was not in vain. That many people were going to either be directly or indirectly, have some impact in the kingdom. And today I'm not going to say that I'm a pastor, but I'm a worship leader today, and I have a ministry. I talk to people. I talk to people online. I talk to people that contact me through interviews and have seen an interview and stuff like that. And I'm here to tell people, that there's so many people today that they believe in the satanic movement, which is huge right now. It's taken over the Grammys, it's taken over the music business, Hollywood. I mean, everybody knows what's going on. Everybody knows everybody's a Satanist, and they're trying to mask it in a way. But you can believe in Satan, but you can't divorce God from Satan. If you believe in Satan, who keeps Satan in check?
Yes.
You know what I mean? And all of the demonic forces,
Yes.
they're kept in check by God. They only have permission and limits and boundaries to so many things, because they tempt men. They tempt men, and it's God uses everything for His purpose. What Satan is meant for evil, God means for good.
Yes.
He uses that for His good. And that's part of my ministry, is to talk to people that really believe in demonic entities. And they try to mask it up now that it's just a lifestyle, and Satan is just like an image head of it. Or like, no, you have no idea what you're getting yourself into.
Yes.
You're paying allegiance and you're worshiping. And that's why a lot of these people are becoming famous. That because Jesus said, when Satan came to tempt him, Satan said, see all the glories, the riches and honor of all these kingdoms I give to you if you just bow your knee. Jesus never confronted him and said, well, those aren't yours to give, because they are. They are his to give. Because Adam forfeited that in the garden. It's not our kingdom anymore. The ruler of this world is Satan. That's just how it is, until the end comes and Jesus comes and claims his kingdom back. So the entities, the demonic entities, are running amok. And that's really why I want to get my story out, is because I believe that I have such a unique story. Most people, you hear, I mean, I've researched every documented demonic exorcism since the 13th century, and they're all an incident. One might last a couple weeks, a couple months, maybe a year, but mine lasted 12 years. So I have a very, very acute, I don't know how to say it, but it's a very acute experience level that I can tell demonic speech.
Yeah.
Like I can tell the difference between somebody who's mentally disturbed and somebody who's demonically possessed, because the demons, they have a speech pattern. They have a speech pattern.
I think that you said in your book that you first realized that your mom had been possessed when you heard, was it when you heard the tapes of Annalise Michelle?
Yes, I
victim?
heard all the same things. I heard all
And you're
the
like,
same things.
oh my gosh, that's my mom.
Yeah, the only thing different was they were in German. They were
Mhm.
in German, and I said, oh my gosh, it's like they were the ones in her. It's really interesting that in the early 70s to mid 70s to late 70s, there was a lot of demonic activity going on. There is a lot of documented cases, a lot of evil. And if you look at, there's a correlation between that and world economies, and there's a correlation between it all. It's all threaded, because, we live in a world that's, as L.A. Marzulli put it, move, counter move. This is
Yes.
how all of life operates.
Yes.
It is God does something, Satan does something. God does something, Satan. I mean, all the wars and all of the
From day
turbulence.
one right up till
Yes.
today. Yeah.
All of the turbulence that we have in life, there's reasons and origins behind it. They're not just, somebody wanted to take over somebody because they wanted their land. There's a reason for that. There's
Yeah.
powers and principalities behind that. And when you start to understand that, you begin to understand the whole world, our whole history. And then you understand that we've been lied to, that they've been covering up the whole agenda, and it's fascinating. And this is where my story has led me. It's led me to that I'm just a piece. I'm a piece in that
right.
whole war,
Michael, one of the really amazing things about your book is you've got this absolute horror story going on. And then there's you. I mean, and on the other side, throughout the whole book, you are living really the best you could live. You found ways to find joy, and you found ways to have hope. You had a dream, you loved music, and you had that dream, you stayed with that dream. And I was amazed that in that situation you were in with, your dad not really there, no real advocate, and then what you're going through with your mom, all of that abuse, that you didn't turn to drugs, you didn't turn to alcohol, you didn't even get involved with women. You started to play in a band, you followed your music, and girls would buy you drinks at your gigs and you'd be like, thanks, stay over there. And
Yeah.
it was that your self-identity, that you were able to keep your stuff out of that. And then I just saw in your story too, you had, through the whole thing, you had faith, hope, and love. You never hated your mother. You wanted it to, correct me if I'm wrong, you wanted it to end, but I didn't see you hating her. And you always had hope, and you always had faith that this was going to get better and you were going to be able to have a life. And I just, you think like, oh, well, that's very uplifting and that's very inspiring, but I feel like it was like a weapon. It was actually a weapon against these things getting into you, and bringing you down and getting you as the target, like you said.
Yeah. Well, I have to tell you, Ursula, you're probably the one interviewer that I've done interviews with that has hit so many points on the nose and never mentioned it. That yes, I was upset with my mother. I think more frustrated than anything, because I didn't understand what it was. But, I knew evil and I knew what good was. And, in my lame kind of way, I tried to remain good. I mean, I was a virgin. I'll tell you, I was a virgin until I met my wife. And I was in rock and roll and all that.
Oh
But I
man,
just
I
wanted
bet
to
the
play music.
demons hated that.
Yeah, I was really, your choir boy without going to church. I mean, I would tell my friends when I was 16, who were doing drugs, and I mean, my friends, they always had hash and stuff like that. And it was like, I was like, dude, your idea of a good time is going to a party, smoking, drinking, barfing, and then having a hangover the next day. I would be like, I don't understand that. I'm sorry, but I don't understand that. A good time for me back then was playing music, having people enjoy it, and then taking a walk up the river in nature. I mean, if you noticed, about the book, like I told you, half of it was edited out. And there was a lot of it I didn't even put in the book, all the gory stuff. And there was so much more about my mother, but I didn't want to be it about her. I didn't want to glorify demonic activity, because there's a lot of people that really enjoy that.
Has to be on God and the positive.
Yeah. I mean, I spent more time in the book, talking about, and some people have contacted me and said, yeah, I was kind of disappointed about that. But, I didn't want to glorify the demonic. I talked a lot about nature and how I enjoyed the seasons changing.
Right.
And then I would go, I mean, that was my therapy. That's what kept me grounded. because I didn't have God. I didn't know who God was, even though I prayed every night. I prayed for my mother every night. I didn't even know what I was thinking or doing. I had no relationship with God. We were Jehovah's Witnesses, you know, and I just never, but I mean, you hit it right on the nose.
And not practicing Jehovah's Witnesses either.
We were at one time, but we got excommunicated, believe it or not.
That's probably a good thing.
Yeah, but I was baptized. I was baptized as a Jehovah's Witness, and that's a sticky point for them, because they're like, once you're baptized, you're saved. And now I go around telling Jehovah's Witnesses, you're living in a cult. Let me introduce you to the Savior. You'll have a relationship, not a religion, and that's been shocking for some people.
Yeah.
But I never hated my mom, even up to the last day. I was upset. Once I began to realize how life was going for me, because, I didn't realize I had PTSD until I was in my 20s, when I started losing my mind because I couldn't deal with life. I didn't know, I wasn't equipped to deal with life. And, I became suicidal. And, today I have severe PTSD symptoms. I mean, I go to bed with my face going numb and burning and pain. And I wake up. This is how I wake up every morning. I wake up not because, I hear the birds chirping and na, 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 na. I wake up with my face in so much pain because of the burning, and the numbness. I get numbness and burning and tingling all in the same thing. And that's how I wake up every morning. I can't deal with life. That's why I'm a musician. I go play for a couple of hours and then I get away. I do my thing and then I go home. I don't sit around and wait for pats on the back and accolades and, man, that was great. I pack up my stuff and I'm gone in a minute and a half. I just can't deal with life. I mean, everyone thinks that, and I'm being very candid here, everyone thinks I've got it all together and, I'm a worship pastor and all this and, worship director, worship musician, I'll say. But the reality of it is I suffer greatly from what's happened to me. I mean, how can you not? How can you go through 12 years I didn't go through puberty till I was like 21 or 22. I mean, I had no hair under my arms until maybe 23. My voice didn't begin to change until then.
And your mom, correct me if I'm wrong, your mom died the day you left Canada, the day you ran away.
Yes. Yes.
Or you fled your life finally and went to California to start a new life.
Yeah, that's not a coincidence. When I left and came to California, I was here a week. And when I had met my wife, I gave my cousin my phone number where I could be reached at. We didn't have cell phones back then. For all you people that don't, this was the 80s. I mean, some people had car phones, but I didn't. I didn't even have a car. But, they called me and they said, listen, your mom died. And when I got the details, they said, yes, she had been dead a week. They think that she had died on this day. And I said to myself, that's the day that I left for California. That is the day that I got on the bus and left for California. And to me, being a God-fearing person, nothing happens by coincidence. And it was like the enemy had taken my mom all the way to death, taken her. The job was done. But it didn't stop there, because I had many, many, many demonic, I'm going to say, activity in my life. Even to this day, it still happens to me. Like I said, it happened last week where I was going to play somewhere. I was in the parking lot. I hear behind me somebody say something, and the voice was so deep, I thought it was a man. And I turn around and it's this woman who stopped and is looking me right in the eye like this, with severe hatred, and speaking to me in another language. And I'm good with languages. I speak a little French. I speak some Italian, Arabic, German, little Norwegian. And it's because of my mom that I learned languages, because I got so frustrated with not understanding what she was saying. And this lady, I don't know what language she was speaking in. It was totally undetectable to me. And I presume it was an ancient language. But she looked at me with just black balls, just like my mother. And she was yelling at me. And I don't even know what she was saying. And I just looked at her and I went, Jesus, Jesus. And she put her hand over her ears and went screaming and ran away. It was a woman. It was a woman.
Wow.
And I thought it was a man. And this happens to me all the time. There'll be somebody at a bus stop and I'll be way across the street, like walking, and they'll be yelling at me and cursing at me. And and it's always somebody who's alone. It's always somebody who's alone. And they'll be cursing at me and yelling at me in a language that I don't understand. And with a man's raspy voice, just like the Annalise Michelle tapes, just like that, you know, this like, it's like the human voice box has been, obviously it's been taken over, but it's like polluted. The vocals are polluted. And that's what it sounds like. And I got like that experience that happened to the lady that was yelling at me. She was like standing behind me. When I looked behind me, I thought it was a man. That, because I was so taken off guard, I was shaking because I knew what that was. I knew what that was. I knew that was demonic entities that were inhabiting this woman and coming out. Because the second I saw Jesus, the second I said Jesus, she put her hands on her ears and ran away screaming, you know. And I had this happen to me last week. I was playing at a farmer's market, and this happened with a lady. You know, it's never ended. It's never ended. And that just gives credence to me, to the fact that, you know, I'm still the target. I'm still the target. And, you know, I'm nothing special. I'm nobody special. I'm nothing, but there's still something I need to do in this life. And I know the Lord has preserved me for this time, because I'm greatly hated by the enemy. And, you know, I've gone through it so much now that it's not, it did shake me up a couple of weeks ago, because I wasn't prepared. You know, I thought there was a man trying to talk to me, you know, when I turned around, it was this woman. But, you know, I know that there's something more I still have to do with the Lord. You know, there's still something I still have to accomplish. I don't know what it is. I mean, I leave myself, you know, I surrender and leave myself under his mercy for whatever, you know, I need to do. You know, I've been blessed to be able to give the gospel, you know, to people like Carlos Santana and some other famous people. I don't want to name drop, but you know, I've actually been able to, I've got a captive audience with people like that, because I'm in the music industry. I know people, and, you know, and I mean, I'll say I'm in the music industry, but I'm barely in the music industry. I mean, I go do my thing for 2 hours a night and then I'm gone. I don't hang around and jaw with fellow musicians, and everybody thinks I'm like, you know, kind of either stuck up or an elitist or something. It's not that. But, you know, how am I going to, hey, let me sit down with you and tell you that I've got PTSD and let me tell you my story, if you're even going to believe it, and then judge me from it, you know?
Right.
So it's like, I just stay out of everything, you know, I stay out of everything. But the only thing I'm involved in is telling my story. That is my testimony. That is my faith. That is, you know, Jesus found me. I didn't find Jesus. You know, he had his eye on me my whole childhood. My childhood was not in vain. It was not in vain. I used to feel that way. I was very angry because I wanted to be a hockey player. I wanted to be a soccer player. And I missed out on all those things in life. But I understand now that he's held me possibly for something higher, even today at 55 years old. And that's my faith. I'm waiting upon the Lord. And that's my story. Like I said, you know, with my book, you know, I edited out so much stuff, so much gore, so much detail, that people were like, you know, oh, that, because that's what I wanted to hear. Of course you do, because you have itchy ears, you know, and
Right.
that's what life is, not about itchy ears. You know, the Bible tells us in the end, that's what people want to hear. They want their ears to be scratched, you know, and I'm here to tell you about Jesus. Yeah, I'm here to tell you about the salvation of Jesus. not the fascination and sensationalism of the demonic world, even though we need to expose it. And that's really what I'm here to say, is to expose it and tell people, this is what it's really about, and this is what it all points to. Jesus came in, I think it's in the book of John, where it says that Jesus came to undo the works of the evil one.
Yes.
And that's what my life is all about. He's come to undo the works of the evil one upon my life. I'm still working on my sister. Well, God's still working on my sister. My dad, who's still alive, he's like 87, 88 years old now, and I've seen God transform my life and many others. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Michael, this has been so wonderful talking to you about this experience and about your books. Actually, books. You actually have 2 books.
Yeah, I have 3 now, and I have a 4th in editing, and then I got a 5th one on the way. So.
Wow. Okay. So I saw that you had the 2nd book that was the Aftermath. It's called the Aftermath. Devil Take the Hindmost, the Aftermath. Those are both available on Amazon. So Devil Take the Hindmost, and then the Aftermath. And the Aftermath is everything that started when you left Canada and your mom died, and then you started to be
attacked. It starts with the day after, when I left and went to California. And it shows you, the enemy's agenda on me through the next decades, right up until today. And I'm probably going to write another book that starts at the end of the last chapter of book 2, because so much more has happened.
Yes,
it's quite a journey. So, and I just released another book to kind of get away from the demonic stuff. It's called Being a Kid is Good Work if you can get it. And it's all about the fun things that happened to me as a kid, because like I said, I don't want to dwell on the demonic.
You know what? It's great. And that's one of the greatest things about the book, is that you had such a joy in life. And it was great. It was such a memoir growing up in the 70s and 80s.
Oh, totally.
Too. It was like,
totally.
That was such a great time to be alive, the golden age before everything, went to hell. And it's really great to read, and it's so uplifting to read. And you had such a sense of humor throughout it too, which was great to read also. So I'm going to put the links to your Amazon author page so people can get all these books. And also you've got a website.
No, I don't have a website. And the reason for that is I'm going to start up a website just for my music, so you can get a hold of me for
your music. Okay.
Events. But, I just don't like being bombarded by people telling me their opinions about, I don't believe you, you're a liar, I accept people, contacting me and saying, hey man, I'm praying for you, or, thank you for that. It really inspired me. I appreciate that, but I don't need people,
Absolutely.
I don't need people, calling me and getting mad at me and telling me I'm a, liar and junk like that. I don't got time for that.
Oh no. Where can people hear your music?
If you Google Michael Anthony Gagliari music, you'll find a couple of my albums, a few of my albums. I've got probably 10 or 11 albums out. Some of the albums were with my band Penny University, and that's University with 2 N's. A lot of soundtrack music. I'm a composer, so I write a lot of soundtrack music. But I've been on the radio all across Europe and everywhere, and it's been fun. And I try to keep a low profile. It's what I do for a living. I play guitar for a living. So
that's wonderful.
Wonderful. So it's my therapy.
Yeah, you gotta have it.
You got to.
Everybody's gotta have it, especially you, my friend.
I
was going to mention that I didn't. That was so interesting to me. It was that the one thing that you ended up struggling with, even though you avoided all the other traps, you became bulimic.
Yes.
I was also bulimic for like 10 years. I almost died numerous times, and it was only like years of psychotherapy and medication. And, people think it's like, you think you're fat. And all the doctors told me it's not that, it's that you feel you have no control over your life.
Yeah.
And it's a way to try and have some control when you have completely no control whatsoever.
Yeah. At the end of it, at the end of it, before I left for California, I was, I'm over 6 feet, 6 feet, half inch. And I was 126 pounds with a
Oh my
26-inch waist. I
Oh,
mean, I was skin and bones,
yeah.
just skin and bones. And then when I met my wife, that all changed. That
Oh,
all changed. And then, I even prayed for my wife, prayed for a wife when I left Canada. I told the Lord, I didn't even have a relationship with the Lord, but I said, I would tell him, Lord, I don't want a girlfriend. I want a partner. I want a
right.
life
Yeah.
partner. Then that's why I never went out with any girls or did any of that stuff, because I knew they weren't right. I didn't feel it,
Yeah.
but when I met Sherry, 3,000 miles away, that's where my life turned around. She showed me what love was. She was a model for that in my life, and I gained weight. By the time I was, I think 23 or 24, I was like 170 pounds. So I put on 50 pounds when we got married,
Oh, that's
which brought me
fantastic.
up to like normal, because I was like 50 pounds underweight,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's
It's
pretty,
raw.
pretty.
It is. That's about the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, was to get over that. It is horrible. And it's one of those things where people go, your mom, your dad goes, just stop doing that. Stop doing
Yeah,
that.
stop it. Stop
And
it.
it's like, you have no idea. You have no idea.
Yeah,
And every day you start again and you try and you try and
yeah.
oh, it's crazy.
In this crazy world.
Well, thank you so much for being here again. I hope maybe you'll come back and join us again another time to talk about some of your other books and stuff. And until then, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Have a
Appreciate it.
great night. All right.
You too.
Thank you all so much for being here on This Present Darkness. I'm so delighted that you follow the channel, subscribe. Oh my gosh, all the new subscribers we've gotten. Thank you so much. Be sure to like this video, comment, share it with everybody, and pass on this important story from Michael that probably a lot of other people have gone through, or maybe will go through. So please help for them to understand the truth about what oftentimes we just think is mental illness, not just, but yeah, just, and perhaps something so much worse. So please do share it. Thanks so much for being here tonight. Until the next time I see you, remember to pray for ghosts. I'm Ursula Bielski.
Thanks for listening to This Present Darkness. The video version of this podcast is available on Ursula Bielski's World of the Supernatural YouTube channel. Be sure to become a subscriber by signing up with Buzzsprout today. And remember to sign up for the World of the Supernatural mailing list at worldofthesupernatural.com for our monthly newsletter and more. And don't forget to support the podcast through Patreon.